We now take you to political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng. Asanda, good evening. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Energy has been a hotbed in South Africa in that every single party during the campaign had some sort of promise and delivery around energy that they would bring about should they get into government. We now have a paradigm where they're all in government, just about. The government of national unity now collectively has to solve South Africa's energy problem. Where do you think the points of divergence would be in that Cabinet Lekgotla that's currently taking place?
Thank you so much for having me. What's interesting for me is how this deal or this idea of a nuclear deal is going to have an impact on our environment and how the environmentalists in the country are going to respond to it, particularly if you remember that at the last deal, there were even court cases against it, and that's how it was stopped in the first place. And so it's going to be interesting to see what's new and what's different. And I'm particularly fascinated by the fact that some of the people who are in that Cabinet Lekgotla were the very people who were against nuclear, but now, of course, that in the GNU, there isn't as loud dissent against it. And I must say that it's been interesting to be in a South Africa that has a different political opposition, that is no longer the DA. It's a little bit quieter, thankfully, and we're able to kind of listen and hear the things that government are presenting with a little less noise. I mean, of course, opposition is important and critique is important, but there was a sense in which the DA was becoming quite tiring in how it was opposing everything that the government was proposing.
They were opposing it, and as Samkelo just reminded us there, on the basis of cost. It was just at an unaffordable scale, to the point where the projections we got, unconfirmed of course, projected that it would cost more than R1 trillion, which would have paralyzed the fiscus if it were to be gone ahead with, or if it had been gone ahead with on loan agreements, could have put us in real credit jeopardy. The question to be asked now is, given that they've scaled down, it's no longer 9,000 megawatts that is being built, there's a promise of 2,500 megawatts. It's a fraction of that. The costs have been significantly reduced. Is that good enough reason to have softened the opposition to a nuclear program by parties like the Democratic Alliance in that meeting today?
Well, I mean, this is why I'm saying it's quite interesting to see how those who were very much opposed to it are now seemingly in support of it. And these are the dynamics that we're going to see with the GNU, where political parties that traditionally were against certain principles and policies and government plans are suddenly going to be its champions and sometimes its very loud supporters. But this is not necessarily a bad thing, in the sense that we do need a South Africa that can solve its problems, including having some of the tough conversations. And so it's more a matter of engaging and being able to have these conversations, particularly, as I've said, with the environmental organizations who took the government as far as court, to be able to clarify what it is from an environmental perspective, never mind the economic scale, that is now kind of palpable compared to the previous deal, which was rejected based on a court order. And so I think that, you know, what's also interesting for me to see, and what was good to see, is that there seemed to be a kind of positive and a jovial nature around, you know, the table, with some of the visuals that were coming out. I mean, of course, part of that is kind of, there's always going to be this fronting and wanting to come across as getting along, but I think it's good that they are present and aware that, you know, their faces will or can cause anxiety in South Africans, whether they look like they're getting along or they look like they're not getting along. Also,
can I pause you there, because I actually do want us to pin to that. I want us to double click in on that, Asanda. This is the first Cabinet Lekgotla that they would be participating in, but more importantly, it comes off of the back earlier in the week where there was a cabinet meeting, an ordinary cabinet meeting. How these set of engagements go will set the tone for the rest of government. If these engagements are hostile, met with a great deal of opposition, and they don't quite have the mechanisms to solve for dissent and disagreement, it could mean that there could be a very fractious relationship going forward in cabinet. How important is it for President Ramaphosa to take control of the room, the flow, the dynamic, and the engagement points, and being able to be a assertive voice where there is disagreement or where there is a deadlock on certain issues in these meetings, particularly for what it spells out for the rest of the cabinet term?
Well, I mean, I've been looking and thinking quite a lot about the dynamics of this emerging government, and one of the things that struck me a lot, I mean, it's something I've been thinking about, is that the cooperative government ministry is actually literally the most important after the president in this particular setup, because they are going to be in charge of ensuring that there is coordination, within the cabinet itself, and then there is coordination within government, and of course, that implementation of that district-led development model that they've clarified today is how they want things to go. It's going to be interesting and important for Cyril Ramaphosa to show an assertive leadership, but also to show a cooperative kind of leadership. And I think, he has experience from 1994 to 1996 in that previous version of the GNU. He also has the experience of trying to put together a constitution as part of a liberation movement with former oppressors pre-1994. And so if ever there was anyone I think for our benefit, who has the experience, it is him. What's interesting, though, to see for me is the ways in which the DA, which has kind of spent a lot of time, going on about the problems that they have, seems to have quietened down compared to what it was just before the final formation, and also to see how even in terms of the sitting of the people in the meeting, you've got ANC people sitting next to IF people sitting next to, different members, including the DA, but you still have, in some respects, the DA kind of clamping together and having the majority of its ministers almost sitting together in one grouping. But another interesting factor that's coming out for me is that it seems like there seems to be much better coordination between the Western Cape government and the national government now that the DA is part of the GNU, with that announcement coming out about the Western Cape and what the plan is, and that announcement particularly coming out from an ANC person, rather than the DA insisting that it comes out of a DA person, which I think in the past would be something that they would have insisted on. And so it's quite interesting to see that, because the DA is leading the Western Cape, but they also are playing quite an important role in KZN. And so it would have made sense even if they had been the ones to make that announcement. But that was also another interesting fact.
Yeah, we'll bring you some more on that, the announcement by the Minister of Human Settlements there on the government intervention in the Western Cape. But for now, Asanda Ngoasheng, thank you so much for your time and your engagement. Really do appreciate it.